David, welcome back. You're watching Sky News. Let's return to our top story now, that plane crash in South Korea, which has left 179 people of the 181 on board dead. The Jeju air flight arriving in Won in southern Korea from Bangkok skidded down the runway after making a second attempted landing. Its landing gear failed to open, leaving it skidding off the end of the runway and into a wall. It exploded and killed 179 people on board.
Tough year for the Koreans. A lot of people are trying to figure out as we mine through this story and learn more details. They say that there are at least 2 people that survived. The rest of the almost, I think, 171 people or 169 people were unfortunately are no longer with us. I think that that's the best way to put it. But people are basically trying to figure out and understand exactly why there was a concrete structure at the end of the runway, regardless of the fact that the landing gear didn't come down. And then also they're trying to determine whether or not it was something wrong with the plane itself, which basically, holding the airline companies accountable. And then also it doesn't help right after I watched that movie on Netflix that's number one. Uh, of them basically saying that it don't be natural disasters all the time. A lot of times it be intentional what's happening to these planes, but let's figure it out.
Well, to try and explain all of this now, I'm joined by the aviation expert David Learmont. David, we are grateful for you to come into the studio, especially on a Sunday afternoon, and talk to us about this. Many, many uncertainties, as you can imagine, still surround what sadly the deadliest aircraft aircraft crash in South Korea. I know you've been studying the footage for us, having a look at it all day for us. What are your assessment at this hour?
Well, I'm pretty shocked actually, because whatever happened to the airplane, which meant that the pilot couldn't get the flaps and gear down for the landing, was not actually what caused the death of the passengers.
Yep.
The passengers were killed by hitting a solid structure just over the end of the runway, where a solid structure should not be. That solid structure contained the instrument landing system antennae, which does need to be there because it guides in bad weather, and of course this was very good weather. In bad weather, that antenna guides the aircraft to the runway, when the pilot can't see it until the last second. Those antennae are normally just stuck in the ground, and they're collapsible, so that if you go over the end of the runway, the antennae collapse and don't cause the aircraft any damage.
Didn't do their job.
But we can see the aircraft running into this structure and just crumpling and exploding.
We can see the aftermath on the screens now, that huge plume of black smoke and, of course, the flames, that explosion instantaneous. Interesting that you say that, and it's a big thing to say, David, I have to say. The country's Deputy Transport Minister has released a statement saying that this 2,800-metre runway is not a contributing factor in terms of length, and more importantly, the walls, of which you mentioned one of them, at the ends had been built according to standards.
I don't know what standards they think were appropriate, but other people, when they put a structure for the instrument landing system antennae, don't put them in a concrete structure. What we saw was, during the video of this landing, was we saw the aircraft being put down beautifully with wings perfectly level. It was sliding on its belly. It was going very fast because the pilot couldn't get the flaps down, possibly because the hydraulics had failed after a bird strike. But anyway, he had to land particularly fast. That's why the aircraft went over the end of the runway. That's why, because aircraft occasionally will go over the end, you don't put solid structures immediately in the overrun. But that's what happened here.
Yeah, and as you say, that the landing, a so-called belly landing, was a very good one.
It was a very good one, and if you watch it minutely all the way down the runway, there is when the aircraft, just before it hits that wall, there is no extant damage to the aircraft. There's a bit of smoke coming off from the friction with the runway. Lots and lots of belly landings or gear-up landings take place around the world from time to time. Aeroplanes can survive this. The crash crews on the airfield are ready for it. So, this did not. The runway, the transport minister is quite right. The runway didn't cause this accident. Something happened to the aeroplane. It disabled it. I think it lost hydraulics. They couldn't get the gear down, overran the runway. It's the wall at the end, right at the end of the runway.
And if that hadn't been there,
If
you're
that hadn't been there,
convinced...
everybody would be alive now.
Yes, OK. Well, I suppose...
It doesn't make sense for them to be a concrete wall, because obviously this doesn't look like it's anything that's just like conspiracy theory or anything like that. But the only reason that you could say that a concrete wall would be at the end of a runway is if it was protecting something. You know what I'm saying? If it was protecting something, or it was preventing them from going into another part of the airline or into another aircraft or something like that, that's the only way that you can logically say that it makes sense for a concrete wall to be at the end of a runway. Never heard of that before.
We will, in the goodness of time, we will find out more. We know that there are 2 surviving crew. They may have some information for the emergency services. Plus, of course, the data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder have now been found, and they, of course, will hold clues. But if we go back to just before this tragedy took place, we know that the pilot did do a Mayday call. He had time to do that. And we know that the tower, the control tower, had released a warning about a bird strike. So there's multiple factors at play here. Plus, of course, as you mentioned, the landing gear was not down.
Well, whatever happened, whether it was a bird strike or something, but one of the engines also appears to have been severely damaged, might have had to be shut down. But the crew managed to fly the aircraft on one engine. It's designed to be able to be flown on one engine. But whatever went wrong, the pilot decided to abandon the first attempt to land, and having done that, he then went to having taken off at the far end, he then turned round, came back, landed on the same runway from the opposite direction. But that landing that we've seen on video, no damage came to the airplane during the run.
Is it unusual to make a second attempt knowing that your hydraulics are failing and not necessarily alerting the air traffic control?
That's the bit that we really want to have clarified. And the cockpit voice recorder, the conversation between the pilots, the pilot knew he had a real problem, and he didn't have much time to deal with it. That's why he put out a Mayday call. So the landing itself, though, that was essential. And he did his best to make it safe, but then the wall was there to get him.
And we just don't know, and then there's never enough...
They're saying it was a bird that caused the malfunction of the landing gear itself, but it wasn't the landing gear that wind up, or the inability for them to be able to land that prevented them from being able to land the plane. It was more or less just the fact of the concrete wall. So the pilot did what they were supposed to do. The passengers were supposed to survive, unless the pilot knew that it was a concrete wall and that they wouldn't be able to go through the concrete wall. But either way, they had to land the plane. There was nowhere else to land the plane. They safely landed the plane. And according to the expert, this is not uncommon for them to be able to land a plane on the belly of the plane itself, because that doesn't prevent you from being able to survive. It just causes damage to the plane, but the passengers are still safe. And, a bird causing issues with the landing gear or something like that, that's not uncommon either. But the problem is that there was a concrete wall that wound up killing 179 people on this airline. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. Just shows you that it could just be one issue that completely upended everybody's lives. I'll keep up to date on this, guys. Make sure y'all tap into the Patreon. Link is in the description. Also, Teach Hanley, 40% off your first order plus 20% off for life. I love you. I appreciate you. I'm going to holler at you later and keep you in touch on what's going on in these streets.